So, today I'm going to talk about starting your book the right way, especially my nonfiction authors. Starting your book the right way. May 1990 was a very challenging month for me. I remember sitting at my brother's high school graduation with mixed emotions. I was sad, I was happy, I wanted to cry, I wanted to clap, I wanted to scream. I wanted to do all those things at once because I sat there with my family and friends, but one very important person was missing: my mom. My mom had missed my brother's high school graduation, her first child, but not by her choice. She was at MD Anderson Hospital battling cancer. So as I sat there, I thought about how she would have given anything to have been at his graduation. And as if those feelings weren't enough, we get to my aunt's house where my dad, who had just come back from Texas with my mom, told us that he was leaving back out that night because the doctors did not think that she would make it. The cancer had taken over her body and the prognosis was no longer good. There was nothing more they could do. That is how we spent my brother's high school graduation, thinking about, praying for, and longing for our mom to get better, to come home, which she did not. So at that point, I had to learn how to deal and cope with living life without my mom. And I did. I learned how to do that. And I think I did a pretty good job learning how to do that, with the help of God, of course. Why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because if I was writing a book about living life or dealing with the loss of a parent, I would start that book with a story. I would draw my readers into my world, sharing my story, a story that they can identify with. Because if they've dealt with the loss of a parent, then they have been there before. They've sat in the seat that I sat in, listening to my dad give us that news. If they did not sit in that seat, they sat in a similar seat, meaning they could feel the emotion from my story because it touched something that they've experienced before. That is how you start your book. You start, number one, with a compelling story, especially if it's a nonfiction book. Hi, Natasha. Good afternoon. Especially if it's a nonfiction book. You start with a compelling story. Draw your reader into your world, into a world that they can identify with. So right off the bat, they're thinking, she gets me. She understands what I'm going through because she's been through it too. So that's number one. Start with a compelling story. Number two is to use descriptive language. I could have said, which I did, I sat at my brother's graduation. But I could have said I sat at my brother's graduation with the sound of cheers and clapping around me, the feeling of the lady sitting behind me with her knees in my back or something. I could have said something to actually draw you in, or even a better description. If I would have said, I don't know if it's my camera, y'all, or if it's this video. So, I don't know, but for some reason I feel like I'm pausing. So anyway, I could have said, so let's say I was talking about being at home, okay? And I was talking about walking downstairs and my mom's cooking breakfast. Just going, a new story, okay? So I could say, I walked downstairs and I saw my mom cooking breakfast. Well, I just told you what happened. I don't want to tell you what happened. I want to show you what happened. So I could say, I walked downstairs as the smell of bacon entered my nose. You use something that most people can really identify with, and most people can identify with the smell of bacon. So the smell of bacon entered my nose as I walked into the kitchen and saw my mom with her pink rollers and yellow robe at the stove. Okay, so I just described the scene. I first brought you in by the smell of bacon. Then I talked about her rollers. You can see the pink rollers. You can see the yellow robe. You can see her standing at the at the stove. She may have her hand on her hip, stirring with the other hand. And I would say all of that to give you a visual of what I'm seeing as the writer. That's what you want your readers to do. Be able to see what you're seeing as the writer. They're not in your head, so you have to vividly explain to them. Use your five senses. Smell is a good one. Try to avoid bad smells though, because that kind of, people don't really want to read about bad smells. So like I use bacon because most people like the smell of bacon, the smell of vanilla, the smell of strawberry, whatever it is. But make it, so that they can smell it themselves as they're reading. So number one, you start with a compelling story. Number two, you draw them in by being vivid with your story as you're telling it. You're using your five senses. You're showing them. You're not telling them. I could say the man was unhappy. I'm telling you he's unhappy. I could say his eyebrows drew together as beads of sweat rolled down his face with his fists clenched together. Okay, that's showing you. I could say he's angry, or I can show you the anger. Show. Okay. The third thing is to know your audience. Who is this story for? If I'm writing a story for young adults, then I will use the language of young adults. I'll use examples that would really relate to young adults. If I'm writing a story just for females, then I will use things that females will relate to. If I'm writing a story just for moms, then I will talk about children. And I will use things that moms can relate to, like no feeling like they don't have enough time in the day, being pulled in all sorts of directions. So I have to know my audience, because knowing my audience helped me to write a story that's specific to my audience. Remember, I told you your story is not for everyone. I don't care what kind of story you write. It's not going to be for everyone. So write the story that's specific to the audience that you are trying to target. Know your audience. Know what they want to know. Know what they need to know. And know the best way to get that information to them. So number one is to start with a compelling story. Number two is to be very descriptive in your writing. Number three is to know your audience. Number four is to set the tone. So even though I started telling a story about the day I found out that my mom was not going to live, that was a sad story. But I ended it telling how I learned how to cope with that, and I learned how to live with the loss of my mom. So so now my reader knows that the rest of my book is going to be about how I overcame that loss and how I was able to continue on with that loss. So even though I started sad, at the end they know, okay, this is going to be a book about victory. This is going to be a book about overcoming. And that's what they need. So they need to know you can identify with them by sharing your story. And then they need to know how you made it through. And that's when you go into giving your tips of how you made it through. And number five, this is for nonfiction and fiction writers. Because nonfiction writers some of them feel like the rules for fiction writers are different for nonfiction, because they're not trying to make up a story. They're just telling their life, which is true. But you're also still a writer. The one big no-no in writing today is no cliches. No cliches. The reader hates cliches. It makes you look like a lazy writer because you're writing phrases that's been said over and over again for years and years to come. So what you do in the beginning, when you're writing your book, when you're working on your manuscript, put the cliche in. Bold the cliche. Then after you go back and you start doing your edits, that's when you figure out how to make that cliche yours. What can you change about that cliche to make it yours and also make it mean the same? That shows that you're a creative writer. You're not just copying phrases from other people. You're creating your own phrases. And what I like to do, I like to challenge myself, and I like to think of phrases that people may say that may become a cliche itself one day that I created. So challenge yourself. Write down a list of cliches and make them your own. And last but not least, don't overshare. We tend to overshare when we're writing, especially nonfiction books, because we want to tell it all. You don't have to tell it all. Only tell what's important to your story. If the main theme of my story is overcoming the loss of a parent, I'm sticking to that theme, overcoming the loss of a parent. I don't need to tell about the vacations I went on so my daddy would make me feel better. I don't need to tell about anything that does not deal with, and maybe I would tell about that. I'm gonna go back, rewind. Maybe I would tell about that because that was part of the process. Being able to see that life still goes on. So I probably would tell about the vacation. But the thing is, the point is, don't share every little detail of what happened. Get straight to the point. Tell the important parts. Get to the point. In the beginning, when you're first writing your manuscript, and I keep stressing this because I don't want you to overthink when you first start writing your manuscript. I want you to just write it. Don't worry about any of this until you get to your editing phase. And that is when you say, is this really important? Does this drive my story forward? Or am I going back and reliving too much that really don't have to be shared? So only share what's important and only share what's driving your story forward. Don't do a lot of reflecting. You can do it in the beginning of the chapter, but if you're talking about moving on, then talk about how you were able to move on. Reflect some, but don't let all of your book be on reflecting on that day. We're talking about moving on, so you need to move your story forward. I hope that makes sense to you all. So to recap, number one, start with a story. Draw them in with a compelling story so that they will know you can identify with them because you've been there yourself. Number two, use descriptive language. Don't just tell them something has happened. Show them something is happening. Okay? Number three, know your audience. Make sure you are writing the book using the words, using the examples that are fitting to your audience. You want this book to be for them. Number four, set the tone. If your book is about victory, even though you start with a compelling, heart-wrenching story, at the end, we need to know that victory is coming and the process of how you got to victory is coming. Number five, no cliches. Write it in your rough draft and then go back and change it up and make it your own. And number six, don't overshare. Only share what's important to your story. And that is how you're going to write a dynamic first chapter, which will continue to other chapters to come. So use those. I will be sharing the tip sheets in a few minutes with all of this on it. Print it out and have it by you as a reference. So when you're writing, you can ask yourself, am I starting with a compelling story? Am I really being descriptive? Am I telling them that the man is angry, or am I showing them that the man is angry? Am I writing to the audience that this book is for? Am I setting a tone at the end of my chapter so they can know what this book is about? Are the cliches gone? No cliches. And am I oversharing? Am I telling too much? Is this really necessary? Can I take this out and just get to the point? So download it, print it out, and use it. And I hope this was helpful. I see some people saying it was. Thank you guys so much. I love doing this. I love sharing writing tips with you all. And if you know anyone else interested in writing, bring them on into the group. It costs them nothing. They get free tips every week, sometimes more than once a week, because this is what I enjoy doing. I enjoy teaching about writing. Writing is my love, and teaching is my love. And God has been so great and enabling me to do both. So I'm going to use this, and I'm going to teach until y'all stop listening. And even if you stop listening, I'm going to keep teaching to myself.